I'm in Dallas, North Carolina, in front of the Hoffman Hotel. It's a museum now. And the neat thing about doing what I do is when you're out in search of something and you uncover one thing, you uncover something else that you entirely didn't expect. This hotel was used to house folks back in the 1800s, but it was also used for a sequestered jury here in the late 1920s. And we're going to get into all of that, but right after this station identification. A lot of these mill villages, they all had houses that looked the same, very simple design. But in 1928, the Luray village was not really a community, was more of an industrial camp. And it resembled the terms of social organization, more of a mob than a society. We're going to talk a little bit about the 1929 strike of the Luray Mill. So in 29, Gastonia was in turmoil and the textile industry was suffering. So they instituted this thing called the stretch out, and it passed the shortfalls on to the workers, basically putting more work on them for less money, and they weren't going to have any part of that. Is called script, and it's from the Woodlawn Mill around 1880. Said that they would exchange this script for goods. This is what the employees would get paid with, in exchange for the goods bought at the company's store. There was this lady called Vera Birch. She worked at the mill, and she said, quote, "They got a thing now they call a hand clock. I say it's an invention of the devil. It measures the yarn that you're spending. They tells you how much you got to spend, but you can't make it. Nobody can make it." They would install these clocks on the machinery that were kept running around the clock, sort of what we would know today as production. If you couldn't keep up, they would find somebody else that could. There was this man named Fred Bill. He'd been working in the mill and in mills since he was 14, and he wanted change. So he was drawn to the Communist Party due to their work on behalf of the common worker. So in 1929, he was sent by the NTWU to infiltrate the southern mills and to organize workers to join the union, and he wound up at Luray Mill. That's where it all started. Now the NTW, they wanted racial equality in the mills, but racism was one of the most striking features about the labor system in the southern mills. They didn't want it mixed. In the spring of 1929, Manville Jenkins, he fired a lot of employees that were involved in the strike. Hey, if you're going to strike, I'm going to get rid of you. So they had to throw them out of their houses, and they went to live in tent cities. Major A.L. Bullwinkle, he was a former North Carolina congressman. He was part of the Committee of 100. It was a vigilante group that terrorized strikers and led a campaign of violence driven by Major Bullwinkle and operated under the direction of the mill management. Right here on this site in 1929, a labor strike led to 2 dead, and it sparked a opposition of unions all across the South. This was a big thing in the 1920s. You see all these newspapers, 15 probably be held without bail for murder. There's a labor defender. The jury was chosen and the trial officially began on September the 4th, 1929. As the prosecution was giving its evidence, a shocking stunt occurred. As they discussed the extent of Chief Andrew Holt's injury, the doors of the courtroom opened up and a life-size figure of the slain chief was rolled in, bloody clothes and all. And the crowd went wild. And one of the jurors, J.G. Campbell, was so disturbed by the sight that he went insane and had to be removed. And the judge had no other choice but to declare a mistrial. Here is the picture of what it looked like. Of J.G. Campbell, he's a juryman that went insane. Look at him. He flipped out. The movie that was made in 1929 is one of the first they called talkies back then, after the silent movies. And this was used. This movie was called The Trial of Mary Dugan. She was the girlfriend of the sheriff, and this is the mock-up of what the sheriff looked like that caused everybody to flip out in the courtroom. Here's an example of some of the protest signs. Fair pay, Labor Day, observe, we want to go to school. The owners of these big plants, they wanted nothing but workers. We don't have time for you to go to school. These mill workers getting off of work. And they're all smiling. They're ready to go home. It's called a dope wagon. Around 1930s, you could see these things being pushed around inside textile mills. Get this, inside these mills in 1930s, there wasn't any air conditioning. These things were extremely hot, and they wanted these workers to keep pushing out more work, more and more and more, faster and faster. The more they could do, more money could make. So let's give them some water. And the reason they became called dope wagons is back in the beginning, Coca-Cola had small traces of Coke in it, and they had Coke. Dope wagons, believe it or not. Now this is a spinning machine from around 1950, and what the workers what their job would be is to keep this thread coming off of here, going to there, keep them moved out. The machine wasn't even cut off. Changing these bobbins out, putting new ones on, keep this thing going around the clock. Remember, time is money and money is time. You know what I said? When you uncover one thing, you discover something else. Well, that's what I've done. This is Lorraine Mills here in Gastonia, North Carolina. Right now it's apartments and businesses and things like that. But in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was something entirely different. It was one big business that a handful of people took advantage of less fortunate people. Back around the turn of the century, little kids like this were used in the textile mills. Little kids like this are working in textile mills. It's one of the reasons that we have child labor laws, and it's what prompted the people to strike. Because these big manufacturer owners, They didn't want the kids to go to school. They want them to work. In 1900, the census revealed that 2 billion children were working in mills, mines, and factories in the city streets across our country. Before birth certificates were a big thing, it was kind of hard to regulate. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, there wasn't a lot of births with birth certificates. It was kind of hard for the authorities to tell how old a kid was. So people could just put these kids to work. And because these new spinning machines didn't require a lot of back-breaking work, it was easy to get kids to do. These kids right here, Minnie Carpenter, she lived in house number 3 at Luray Mill in Gastonia. She was a spinner. She made 50 cents a day. And younger girls, they kind of worked irregularly. Could you imagine if these walls could talk, what they'd say to you? Could you imagine the sweltering heat here in the South in the summertime with no air conditions, just maybe a window open? And probably hundreds of kids working in this mill, not having the opportunity to have a childhood, but having to work. Big mill bosses, they didn't really want the public to know that kids were working in the mills. Here's a photo that was taken of the kids in the window. Here's where our story comes to an end. It's been really educational. I want to thank you for stopping by my channel. If you like this channel, be sure to give me a thumbs up and share it with your family and friends. And until next time, y'all have a good day.